Buon pomeriggio a tutti quanti. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Fabio Petito, and I'm the head of the program on religions and international affairs based at ISPI, the Italian Institute for International Political Studies, supported by the Italian Ministry of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation. And I'm delighted today to be here to moderate this roundtable on religions and the Sustainable Development Goals agenda, why it matters. Just a few words of introduction. This is an event that has been made possible, it's co-organized by a consortium which is made by the Kew School of Global Affairs at the University of Notre Dame, represented here by Professor Scott Appleby, by the International Partnership on Religion and Sustainable Development Goal, represented by Kushwant Singh, and of course has been organized in collaboration with the Italian Minister of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation, and it's the opening event of a policy dialogue that will continue tomorrow in a more kind of a closed-door session at the Roman campus of the University of Notre Dame. Now, we are delighted to have been able to organize this conversation in the context of Coopera, and I will just want to say a few words of introduction, because it's true that the modern project of international development has emerged after World War II was very much a secular project. In some way, the idea was that development was associated with the idea of modernization. Countries will go through different processes, but will move from being traditional societies into modern society. And one of the key ingredients of the traditional society was religion. And the idea was that therefore religion was an obstacle, possibly, to development and modernization. Now, this was the origin of the International Development Project. Of course, then the international policy community moved, and we had the Millennium Human Development Goal, and today the Sustainable Development Goal. As we moved from more economicistic understanding of development, the role of religion started to reappear and being recognized also as a positive potential partner of force in development. And so today, we are very delighted that many government and international organizations actually see religions as possible partners in strengthening the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. And this is also why many governments and international organizations created a platform like PARD, the International Partnership on Religion and Sustainable Development, to help all these different stakeholders to work together to harness the positive impact of religion for sustainable development. Now, and that matters a lot. I just want to say two more points. Of course, even in the moment in which the International Development Project was very secular, we all knew that religion mattered. It was enough to go in many parts of the local south, global south, and we will find that religious people and organizations working on the ground were crucial for education, were crucial for sanitation, cleanliness, health. And here in Italy, I have to say, it's also why many of I missionari italiani, the Italian missionaries, were always regarded with great respect from whatever political or religious or non-religious position within Italy, and many times also by the people on the receiving end of their activity in schools, in hospitals. So actors were always the implementers and the deliverer of local development process. But now I think, and that's the second point, we are opening up a different conversation, a conversation which wants to suggest also that actually religious partnership can mean also a different dialogue that government, international organization can actually possibly learn and change some of their approaches to development based on this dialogue. This morning, it was very interesting, the speech by Cardinal Parolin, the Secretary of State of the Holy See, after the speech by President Mattarella, suggested something that I think expressed this possible shift very well by looking at the 5 P around which this conference is organized. Cardinal Parolin said that the 5th P, which is perhaps the crucial one, partnership, seen from the perspective of the Catholic tradition of integral human development, he argued, must mean also encounter, dialogue, so mutual learning, within, he argued, the perspective of human fraternity. Now, this is a quite interesting point. It shows how we have so much to learn from each other to improve the kind of development intervention that can help also community locally. And now this is also why I'm really grateful and sincerely appreciative of the presence of the Italian Deputy Minister on Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation, Marina Sereni, who not only accepted that we have this discussion embedded in Coopera, I would say a bit more, she even encouraged us and has been supporting us for some time in this work. And so I want really to thank her. She will provide some introductory remarks to set up the stage for our conversation, as she is also the host of all the conference. Unfortunately, she will be very busy, and after she will not be able to stay with us very long. Without further ado, Deputy Minister, please join us. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Distinguished panelists and guests, dear colleagues and friends, ladies and gentlemen, I am really delighted to welcome you at the second edition of our National Development Cooperation Conference, Coopera. This side event on the contribution of religions to sustainable development is jointly organized by ISPI and the University of Notre Dame with the support of the Italian Ministry of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation. I would like to thank the co-organizers, especially Professor Fabio Petito, for their work and the panelists for their participation. I believe that having this panel within our Coopera conference is very meaningful. The relevance of religions to advance peace, mutual understanding, and development is now widely recognized. As part of people's daily life, religion is tightly linked to a number of human activities. Religion is a response to many basic spiritual needs of people, and as such can contribute to a person's integral development as both an individual and a member of the society. At the societal level, religion is a powerful driver to collective action. Moreover, religions have a number of values in common, such as the respect for human dignity, mutual responsibility, generosity, and the care for the most vulnerable ones. In this perspective, religions and religious representatives should play a fundamental role in preventing acts of religious intolerance, especially those towards minorities, and foster dialogue among persons with different faiths and beliefs. The Sustainable Development Goals are collective and comprehensive in nature. They are meant to engage countries, international organizations, societies, and individuals in a joint and cross-cutting effort. This is why every single aspect of human life can underpin this overall strategy. We may think of how important individual behavior is in protecting the environment or in saving lives during the pandemic. When people feel part of a community, this sense of belonging will strengthen their determination in pursuing shared goals. In addition to this, religious communities have a long tradition of engaging in social and humanitarian activities. In some remote areas around the globe, they have a stronger presence and a better outreach than governmental agencies. They often enjoy more trust than other players. As a result, faith-based organizations have become natural partners of states and international organizations in the field of development cooperation. In line with SDG 17 partnership, awareness on the potential of civil-religious cooperation is now growing at the global level. In this regard, I would like to recall the joint statement that UNICEF and Religions for Peace, a global multi-religious platform convening religious leaders and religious institutions from over 90 countries, released in New York on 7th April 2020 on the launch of a global multi-religious faith in action COVID-19 initiative. The aim of this initiative is to raise awareness of the impacts of this pandemic on the world's youngest citizens, and, I quote, "It reflects the unique and critical role played by religious leaders and actors in influencing values, attitudes, behaviors, and actions that affect the development and well-being of the world's children." End of quotation. In addition, on 19 March, the Director General of the World Health Organization, Tedros Ghebreyesus, met with Religion for Peace senior leaders for a high-level dialogue centered on the value of multi-faith collaboration in the pandemic response, especially the role faith leaders and organizations play in the COVID-19 vaccine rollout. They met again on last June the 8th and signed a memorandum of understanding on emergency preparedness and universal access to health care. Since a long time, Italy has been fostering a cooperation with religious and religiously inspired actors. Italy confers the utmost importance to the role that religious communities may play in the field of the international development cooperation. Their messages of peace and friendship, their strong commitment in favor of the mutual comprehension among people regardless of their origin, can indeed help us build a world where the idea of sustainable development becomes the central pillar of international relations. Bearing this in mind, the Italian law has foreseen a mechanism, the so-called 8 per 1000 or 8 per 1,000, under which Italian taxpayers can voluntarily devolve 8 per 1,000 from their annual income tax return to legal entities representing a religious community officially recognized by the Italian authorities. Such contributions are often used for the implementation of development initiatives. In 2020, some 90 million euros were destined to international projects in developing countries through this channel. The pandemic has had a dramatic and long-lasting impact on our lives. The unprovoked and unjustified aggression against Ukraine has further added to this uncertainty. Throughout history, in times of crisis, tension, and war, people have resorted to spirituality, be it religious or non-religious, in their quest for answers. It is quite clear that we are living in an age of transition in which old paradigms do not hold anymore. The lack of a deep and comprehensive cooperation between the secular and the religious spheres is possibly one of them. When states, international organizations, religious communities, and civil society join their hands in the pursuit of common objectives, they can achieve far better results than acting alone, or, which is even worse, attempting at sidelining one another. At present, there are positive trends in the global interfaith landscape that we should support and capitalize on. In the wake of the Abu Dhabi Declaration on Human Fraternity, co-signed by Pope Francis and the Grand Imam of Al-Azhar, Sheikh Ahmed Al-Tayeb, the dialogue between Christianity and Islam has reached a level never seen before. Throughout the Middle East, we are witnessing an array of initiatives aimed at bringing Muslims and Jews closer to one another, in spite of all political hindrances. At the same time, the Ukraine war has shown us that religion may have an ambivalent nature and that it can be easily misused for political purposes that have nothing to do with faith. Nonetheless, recent events also prove that people expect religions to be forces for good. Moreover, such tensions have not prevented many religious communities from actively engaging in humanitarian activities in support of conflict-stricken populations. Let me conclude by pointing out that interfaith dialogue is proving successful on such cross-cutting issues as peace, the respect for human dignity, the fight against violent extremism, environment protection, poverty reduction, inclusivity, and the fight against inequalities. All these goals perfectly fit into the 2030 Agenda. Governments and international organizations should provide platforms for this cooperation to strengthen and flourish, as interfaith dialogue remains the best antidote against polarization, extremism, and hate. Thank you again for being here, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Minister. You set us on a very good journey for continuing this conversation around this topic, and I'm delighted to have a fantastic panel, and I'm not saying out of courtesy. I really think it is. And perhaps I'll just introduce our panel briefly before going into the discussion, and I'll follow from our extreme right. We have no political connotation, Kushwant. We have Kushwant Singh, the Executive Secretary of the International Partnership on Religion and Sustainable Development, this global platform which brings the International Development Agency like USAID, the DFID, the EU International Partnership Department, and hopefully we will hope soon the Italian Ministry of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation and other stakeholders leading this conversation. Then we have Professor Scott Appleby, the Dean of the Keough School of Global Affairs at the University of Notre Dame. And for anyone who has ever studied the topic of the role of religion in international relations, a pioneer of the fields, which has shaped many of the discussion around religion and politics, religion and peace building, religion and development. And here I want to mention who has been engaged in the last few years also in the building of a new School of Global Affairs, which at Notre Dame made very central many of these issues we are discussing today at the heart of what the global challenges we face are. And then we are extremely honored that His Royal Highness Khalifa Mohammed Sanusi II from Nigeria has joined us. And I know how busy you are, how many different things you are engaged with. His Highness was the 14th Emir of Kano, one of the two most important Islamic religious authority of Nigeria. is today the Grand Khalifa of the Tijaniya Sufi order, which is the most important Islamic Sufi order of West Africa. And I have to say he has an extraordinary journey because among the many things he has done, he was also the central banker, the governor of the Nigerian Central Bank. So he's coming with a finance background as well. So no one is more fit to discuss these sort of issues on this panel. On my left, I'm delighted that from Jerusalem, Sharon Rosen has joined us. Sharon is the global director for religious engagement of the Search for Common Ground, a very important peace-building organization operating in many conflict situations around the world. And Sharon has been pioneering some very important work here. I just mentioned your very important work on bringing religious communities together for the protection of holy sites in the Middle East and in many other parts of the world. And last but not least, Monsignor Father Josh Kuretetam, who is coming from the Dicastery for the Promotion of Integral Human Development and the Holy See, and he's been coordinating the work on ecology and creation, and has been very active from a scholarly perspective and a practical perspective on all issues raised by Laudato Si, the encyclical that Pope Francis produced a few years ago. So we are for a great start, and I don't want to lose more time. And so I want to turn to Professor Appleby immediately and ask, so religion and sustainable development goals, why it matters? Why it really matters?
Thank you, Fabio, and welcome to everyone. Thank you for being here. Well, of course, religion matters, and in at least three major ways. I'm going to restrict my comments at this point to the first. Those who have studied the history and practices and beliefs and the contemporary presence of religions around the world, I think would agree that religion is comprehensive. To comprehend religion is to recognize that it's comprehensive. That is, religions don't ask for a little quadrant of the soul. They address the whole soul, the whole person. They teach and practice in a way that addresses every dimension of human life, almost every conceivable dimension, from cradle to grave and beyond. They are concerned with education, with health, with poverty, with justice. And the claim is that there is no dimension of human life foreign to us. And the particular expertise, if you can use that term, the particular gift of these religions is precisely to understand the spiritual, which is, in many minds, the integral dimension of life on earth. So the religions are comprehensive. They comprehend the whole of the human person and a range of issues and needs and priorities of human life and human dignity. Well, I don't think I've ever seen anything produced by a secular organization, including the United Nations, that is as comprehensive as the Sustainable Development Goals. The goals are breathtaking in their expanse of coverage of every dimension, almost, it seems, of human life, focusing on poverty and health and gender equality, and moving also into dimensions that certainly have a clear spiritual dimension, peace and justice, rights. So this is a comprehensive plan, if one will, for the betterment of humankind, the flourishing of peoples around the world. You can see the parallels with religion. And SDGs have a little bit of a religious quality. They have their own high priest. Jeff Sachs, a good friend and colleague, would be one of them. They have their rituals. They also suffer a bit as the traditional churches, and then there's not as many people in the pews as they would like. That is, there are not as many governments that are fulfilling their pledges from some years ago yet. So they're trying to get more converts into the church of SDGs. The point here is that the Sustainable Development Goals also have this ambitious, breathtaking, deeply humanistic mission. So how can they work together? Of course, religion is part of that conversation. And that is why Pope Francis, in his address to the United Nations in 2015, on the occasion of the declaration of the 2030 Agenda, endorsed it enthusiastically with this one condition. In that speech you will read that the Pope says, these Sustainable Development Goals must be approached from the framework of integral human development, which is not merely a Roman Catholic term, but a broader term, and there are different ways we talk about this, but placing an approach that places each human person, the human person, and the inherent God-given dignity of each person at the very center of any attempt to advance development, progress, human flourishing. And that at that center is a human person who's not merely a producer or a consumer, but also a member of culture with a particular language and history, not to be conflated with others, a member of a family. The whole human person is at stake. Religions can quibble back and forth about how much religion should be in politics or in economics and the relationship, but integral human development is a recognition that every aspect of life that is part of human dignity and flourishing must be attended to. And so a narrowly technical or reductionistic approach to development that only sees the human person as homo economicus, for example, is not only bound to fail, but will backfire. And so religion, I think, needs the conversation with the sustainable development community, and certainly the sustainable development community is profiting from and learning from the wisdom of religious traditions.
Thank you very much, Scott. And I want to turn to His Highness Sanusi. You clearly have a very interesting background, and I know you have been advising recently also the UN Secretary General on the SDG agenda. Should you say one message? Why do you think this issue of religion matters for the SDG agenda?
Thank you, Fabio, and let me thank you for inviting me to this panel. In a sense, the SDGs benefited from a conversation, an earlier conversation between development community and the faith communities. I mean, if you go back to the World Bank in the late 1990s, early 2000s, when Jim Wolfensohn was the president of the World Bank, he started an engagement with faith-based organizations, with the World Council of Churches. And at that time, there was a clear divide between a religious outlook on development and the World Bank's outlook. Development before then had been focused on the materialist, quantifiable elements of development. It was GDP growth, it was per capita income, rate of inflation, and so on. While the religious community felt that the human being was much more than the material things. And in fact, you had a number of Africans who would say, look, we're very happy to be poor, but we would like to have our freedom, would like to have our dignity. And these are things that usually were not measured by the development community. Now we look at the SDGs, as Scott has said, look at the whole questions around gender equality. Look at the questions of climate change. I mean, you can go back to Pope Paul VI's comment about how the first commandment in Genesis was fill the world and subdue it, and how the Catholic Church has interpreted that as taking care of the environment. Or you can look at Muslim jurists talking about the same creation in the Quran, where a man was sent as the Khalifa on earth, as a vicegerent of God on earth. And that is not just about dominating and technical instrumentalization, but also about nurturing and taking care of and protecting so that humanity can benefit generation after generation. So these are already the views of faith-based leaders integrated into the SDGs. Now, there are, of course, other very obvious reasons why religion remains relevant. One reason is religiously inspired violence, which we cannot address without the involvement of religious leaders, and violence, obviously, is something that retards development and gets in the way. Another is the whole ethical content of religion, because, we talk about these poor countries, we talk about poverty and food insecurity and the lack of education, and sometimes at the heart of those problems are problems of bad governance, there are questions of corruption, questions of injustice, and these are areas where religious leaders and religious actors can play a role. In the case of Islam, you've got this whole thing about Islamic finance. You've got all sorts of ethical funds run by churches, which have helped with financial inclusion. But there are also other dimensions, as I was discussing with Fabio earlier. Take the whole question of demographic implosion and population policies. We do understand that in most of the developing world, you've got a very fast rate of population growth that's outstripping the rate of growth in resources, leading to all sorts of developmental problems and conflicts. Now, how do you address that without addressing questions about what is our attitude to girl-child education? What is our attitude to the age at which girls get married? What is our attitude to the number of wives you can marry, the number of children you can have? You cannot do that by legislation from the state. We've seen it. Even in countries like Turkey, you can legislate instrumental issues like commercial law and contracts, but when it comes to the personal beliefs of people, you must have people that they trust and people who have the authority to speak to them. You can't have the government tell a woman about family planning and contraception. You need her to talk to her priest or to her imam, who will tell her that child spacing is not inconsistent with the religious beliefs. So there is no way, in fact, many of the key objectives of SDGs can be achieved without the involvement of religious actors. And to borrow from Scott, by the way, I'm one of the UN Secretary General's SDG advocates, so I'm one of the priests. Not a big one, but one of a number of 24 priests, not the bishop or the cardinal. But I will also take this opportunity to invite all of us to come to the pew and to look at these issues and be involved in these issues, because we do need to work together in order to deliver development.
Thank you very much. Already many interesting things. Sharon, what is your take? So much has already been said. I'm sure that you have your own take on one message, one important point.
Thank you, Fabio, and it's great to be here with you and with all of you. I was just thinking myself that basically you have a panel here who all agree with each other. So how can I find something that might be a little bit different or in a way can catch your imagination? And maybe just to say that we are sitting here in a largely secular Europe, but in actual fact, the vast majority of the people in the world, the heart of their identity is wrapped up in religion. It is the way they live their lives, live with their communities, live with their families, live in their societies. And as a result of that, their attitudes and behaviors are very much influenced by their religious attitudes and religious ways. And we absolutely cannot ignore that. By ignoring that, we are not going to be able in any way to create the healthy, just, and safe societies that we would like to live in and that the Sustainable Development Goals are trying to bring forward. Another point, and we have heard before, is that religious leaders are the most, or religious actors, because here I really want to include women as well. I want to include young people as well. Often religious leaders tend to be those who have formal qualifications, but we really need to include everybody if we're going to make a difference for the sustainable goals. So they are generally the most trusted people in their communities. We have got lots of research that shows that, and the pandemic has actually reinforced that understanding, that it is through religious actors that we can change attitudes in societies. So we also know that many humanitarian and developmental organizations are faith-based and are on the front lines of making change for the betterment of development in the world. So if you take all those into consideration, then I would throw back the question to you, how on earth can you actually carry out the Sustainable Development Goals without religious inclusion? Religion absolutely matters. Just one other thing I want to say is that the SDGs came along after the Millennium Development Goals, as you said, and it had a different take. If the MDGs really focused on the impoverished world, what will the rest of the world do to help the impoverished world become less poor, have more education and more health? The SDGs came along and spoke about the fact that we live in an interrelated world and that the whole world needs to change in order to make a difference. And therefore, if we are going to do that, we absolutely have to include religion as well within that formula to make the difference. At the same time, 2030 is only 8 years away, and it's pretty clear that we are not going to achieve the goals we would like in the next 8 years. So it will be interesting to see how religion, in partnership with others, can truly make its mark and help to deal with the issues of polarization that we see, the total lack of faith now in political institutions on the whole, and also the need to build agency amongst individual people. We all have to work together to bring those SDGs to fruition. So building up that agency is also very much what religions can do.
Thank you very much, Sharon. And Khushwant, this is the bread and butter of your daily work. Tell us, what is your take on why it matters?
Yeah, thank you so much, Fabio, for having me here. And not much butter is left. What should a young man say when we have highly experienced and respected people who have said everything that is really important to say? But I try. You have mentioned it all, so I'm not saying too many new things, but perhaps in a different light slightly. When 4 out of 5 people on this planet at this moment affiliate to a religious, spiritual, or indigenous tradition, then how can we not, as you have said, Sharon, not include religious actors in the context of the Sustainable Development Goals? Actually, every politician should first run to the largest civil society players, religious communities, to talk to them and listen to them. How can we reach what we were not able to reach so far? First point. The other thing, and you have also mentioned it, and I want to emphasize it, and perhaps it's good that the respected Italian minister is not here anymore, but I have to say it. Politicians, usually, there are exceptions, do not reach the heart of people, but it's religion that touches and reaches the heart of people. So if we want to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, we need to reach the heart of people. We have a climate crisis, we have wars going on, as we all know in this moment. People are dying, children are dying. We have many other challenges in the social field in terms of violence, extremism, and so on and so on. So many challenges. So if we want to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, we have to reflect and see how can we touch, first of all, not the heart of the others, but how can I touch my own heart? How can I change my own behavior? Because without behavioral change, we cannot achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. And too often, from at least my perspective, not as the head of Secretariat of PART, but also from the perspective as a Sikh, which is a kind of very wisdom-oriented religion, we talk too much about structural, technical approaches to achieving the Sustainable Development Agenda. Yes, it is very important to develop new technologies, but we need the right mindset to use a technology. We need the right mindset how to use a scalpel. We can heal someone, but we can also kill someone with a scalpel. So religion gives us this guidance, and I think we need to make more out of it. Another point, you have also mentioned a couple of examples, and from the perspective of development cooperation, when we want to fight corruption, yes, the state can preach to people, but it's not as effective when the priest and the imam goes to the people. And a very recent example I can give you from Uganda, where the Interfaith Council, and you have been highlighting the importance of interfaith dialogue, went to the people, and in the mosques and in the churches and all the other religious places, the same message went to the people, that corruption in the long run is harming our children, is harming our own country. No politician was able to deliver that message in that clarity to millions of people within a week. Since Scott is sitting next to me, of course, I have to say something about his pioneering role also with the Chicago Council of Global Affairs. They said, I think in 2010, that it's very important that religion and religious actors work much more closely with governments. They also said that multilateral cooperation is needed when we want to tackle global challenges. And they also said that we have to raise the religious literacy. So religious literacy means that we all need to understand how to factor religious actors and religion into not only development cooperation, but I would even say in politics in general. There were times, I wasn't born then, but I have heard that there were times when the king and the rulers were listening to the advice of those ones who were sitting in the chair of religion. They were giving guidance. So I hope that we have that openness not to have kind of stereotypes in our head that religion is something which is backward. You have given all the arguments, but religion has to step forward and provide the answers we are looking for. Thank you.
Thank you, Kushvant. And Father Josh, your take, I mean, clearly Pope Francis has already been mentioned a number of times. What would you add to this already rich conversation?
Thank you, Fabio, for the invitation, and delighted to be with you. I feel very happy and also humbled that we have Archbishop Bressan here, who could speak much better than me. Speaking at the end, it's not very easy to bring anything new, so I would rather reinforce what was already mentioned, maybe with the privilege of working for Pope Francis. I think just 3 simple points. One is the quantitative dimension. It was already mentioned. But to put it in numbers, we are 83% of humanity, the religions. And our strength is not so much in our leaders, but in our communities. And when Pope Francis announced the special Laudato Si year in 2020, our brothers and sisters in Bangladesh, they said, we are going to plant at least 1 tree for each Catholic. And by the end of the year, they planted 2 trees for each Catholic. So it makes a difference when our communities come together. The second point, I think, is the quality. Laudato Si was mentioned. A very secular study that came out in the Journal for Biological Conservation. They were trying to examine the interest on environmental issues from 2008 onwards. There was a high point with Copenhagen. It started dipping. Then somewhere around 2015, just by going through Google searches, they found it again came up. And empirically, they identified that to Laudato Si, the interest, because it came from a religious leader. I think in Indonesia, against deforestation, government tried everything possible. Then imams came together and they said, if you are to cut down trees, they declared a fatwa. It's a sin. And that worked. So we have, a quality of faith communities that unfortunately is probably not sufficiently appreciated. And the third and the last thing, I think we can bring an extra depth, an extra radicality Depth because we don't see the world just as nature. We see it as sacred. It's like Moses, we had to remove our sandals. It's holy ground entrusted to us. But also we are inclusive. I was just thinking after we began the conversation, who speaks today of the Horn of Africa, Kenya, Ethiopia, Somalia, where they have had an unprecedented drought, people dying of hunger, and every 48 seconds, someone is dying of hunger. Is the media speaking about it? And where the religions, faith communities are close to them. So on these many fronts, I think religions are important. Our faith communities can partner with the civil society, with the governments to promote development, to promote the flourishing of life. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Father Kuretadam. I think, in some way came very strong the message that it matters, and almost it's quite unclear why it didn't matter before. However, I have to point to you, that this crucial idea of partnership, the SDG 17, which should be this crucial tool to really address all these challenges. Our government never mentioned specifically religion when they designed it. They were thinking about business, probably civil society. So, although the conversation is changing, there is what do you think are the main obstacles? Why governments really are not hearing the importance of this message? What can be done, perhaps, to further change this? And I ask you because I know you all have relationship with governments and different organizations dealing with this challenge. Who would like to maybe?
Yeah, thanks, Fabio. Well, first of all, I think there's a whole ideological issue here where there's an attempt to show that the world is secular and religion is pushed to the margins. And that whole idea of a Western liberal, secular, modern ideology is that which has come to define all government that seeks to be modern. Secondly, I think there's a lack of understanding. And as I said, Jim Wolfenson understood this. He started with the World Bank. He actually created a unit in the World Bank that I think was run by Catherine Marshall. And that unit started engaging faith-based organizations. But clearly, he was a minority. Once he left the World Bank, the unit was closed down. Okay, so there is the need to, first of all, get people to accept that you cannot bifurcate this world into religious and secular, that a human being cannot think of himself as, on the one hand, here's a spiritual, ethical dimension, and then here's a material, economic, which is the kind of thing Scott was talking about, until those who are at the forefront of policy making understand the role played by spirituality, by ethics, by faith in the life of the people they're trying to affect. They're not going to accept the importance of this form of integration. Having said that, I think we as religious actors also have to force ourselves because we've also kept ourselves to the margin. There is a fear of getting involved in politics. So you don't want to talk about good governance. You don't want to talk about corruption. You don't want to talk about some of the issues of justice and equality. And we're living in societies with huge vertical and horizontal inequalities. It's not just about, you find the poorest. I come from a country where the state I come from, Kano, has one of the highest rates of poverty, but from the same state, you have the richest man in Africa. Okay, so you've got huge inequalities within poor countries. And then you've got horizontal inequalities where certain parts of certain countries show extreme levels of poverty while other parts are living in opulence and wealth. And this is, I think, the role of religious leaders to point out these injustices, these inequalities, and you can never really have complete human flourishing where human beings within the same community can look around and feel so totally marginalized relative to their peers. And these are the kinds of interventions I think we need to make. We need not to shy away from them. The politicians don't want us to make these interventions, but we've got to start getting politicians out of their comfort zone. They're very happy to keep us out. We need to make sure that we bring them into that conversation and challenge them to think about these things.
Very, very interesting. So, Kushwant.
Yeah, I want to draw on that. Sometimes I think in life, the most difficult part is to be the courageous one who steps forward and say, although no other government is working on that issue in a systematic way, we will be the first ones. And I can say, and I'm from Germany, I can say that the German government had talks with the World Bank and with the leaders then, and realized religion is important in development cooperation. So they stepped forward and established a program called Religion and Development, which is run and still run, and our secretariat of the partnership is attached to that program. So they were courageous, and that program was established in 2015, and part was established in 2016. And the idea was exactly that we cannot just have conversations here and there on religion and development, but how to have a structured dialogue where governments, multilaterals, but also academia and religious actors sit at one table, discuss challenging issues, also tough issues, health, gender, environmental protection, peace, security, all these issues, and come up with concrete initiatives. So by now, after a couple of years, I can say that we are working on the issues I've mentioned. We are also working on the food crisis, and we are also working on the issue of FORB, an issue like freedom of religion or belief, which wasn't very prominent in part, but now the members have realized if you want to work on religion and want to use the potential of religion, you need freedom of religion, otherwise you cannot use that potential. In terms of the obstacles, I think we need a narrative that shows other governments that there's an added value in including religious actors when it comes to sustainable development. And I just want to read out a quick, very short statement by the Danish government, because the colleague Christian couldn't come, but he asked me to read out that statement, and you will see from that statement what is the added value at this moment the Danish government sees while working in part. And I'm reading out. The Foreign Ministry of Denmark reports that Denmark has been a proud member of PART since 2017. Through PART, we have gained access to relevant knowledge, resources, and exchange experiences with other governments, multilateral entities, and different faith-based civil society organizations worldwide. As a platform, PART has facilitated meaningful discussions around current and relevant topics, including the role of religion and religious actors in the fight for gender equality and women's empowerment, peace and stabilization, and human rights, including freedom of religion and belief. Hence, our Denmark's membership is also a natural international extension of our strong partnerships with FBOs in Denmark. So in short, what they are realizing is they have been collaborating with religious actors in Denmark for decades, especially with Christian actors, but then they realized we have to include all religions when it comes to sustainable development.
That's very, very interesting. Sharon, you want to jump in?
Yes, I actually have a slightly different take on that, and that's from my own personal experience. I have been with Search for Common Ground, which is the largest peace-building organization working in this field, for 17 years. But I became the Global Director of Religious Engagement only 5 years ago, and it was a new position at Search for Common Ground. Why did that happen? Because we started to see that there was actually more funding available for working with religious actors in the field of conflict, transformation, but not only. And so I came in when we were working, when I started working, we were in 1 or 2 countries. One of them was in Jerusalem, where I have been living for many, many years, and we were always doing religious engagement there. We are now, 5 years later, working in 20 countries on religious engagement with religious actors, and the numbers are expanding exponentially. And a lot of that money, almost all our funding comes from governments, the main focus of it, though, is freedom of religion or belief, or religious freedom, as they call it in the States. And we have actually a very interesting project which is covering 7 countries, funded by the Dutch government, called JISRA. It's the Joint Initiative of Strategic Religious Engagement, where we are working intra-religiously, working inter-religiously, and then advocating for religious freedom to governments, both nationally and internationally. But what I do want to say is that, well, two things quickly. One of them is that I think governments need to understand more that we don't only need to work with religious actors on religious issues like freedom of religion or belief, that religious actors can talk about all the issues that the SDGs are dealing with. So that's one aspect. And the other point is that many governments don't know how to work with religious actors. And this is what we're hearing. We developed resources for working with religious actors, and the governments themselves are very interested in learning from these resources.
Yeah, thank you. If I had just 2 points, and I will begin with the second point I had in mind, which is minor, looking introspectively into faith communities. Last Saturday I was speaking with an archdiocese of Atlanta in the U.S. and climate crisis, and the very second question, someone said, "Father Josh, so sorry, I have to disagree with you. There's no climate problem." We are used to these questions, and my take was that probably he was planted there by the oil lobby, or he was so well prepared. So I answered scientifically. I said, "Go to Pakistan now, where it's 51 degrees centigrade. People are struggling to live like that." So I think we need to look into ourselves. Maybe religion, after Laudato Si came out, we had a lot of criticism. Why is Pope Francis concerned about nature, climate? We should be worried about the salvation of souls, as Fabi said at the beginning. And I think religions, we have failed to be prophetic. If there is evil outside, it's caused by us and belonging to that 83% mostly. So can we, like Pope Francis, take a very courageous stand? He spoke of an economy that kills, and when he spoke it 6-7 years ago, people laughed at him, but today they are listening to him. So I think looking into ourselves. But the second, the deeper point, as a philosopher, and I think also to place our dialogue in the context, I think the challenge is to change the paradigm. We just have 8 more years left to realize the SDGs. If we go on at this rate, we won't realize. Not just because we lack technical resources, not even money. I think the whole paradigm has to change. I think of Thomas Kuhn, who spoke of paradigm shift. He uses the example of, for many centuries, we thought Earth was the center, the geocentrism. Then Copernicus said, no, sun is the center. But it took over a century for that paradigm to really, even to come into astronomy and to rest of our thinking. Because it was not just a scientific problem. There was a religious component, the spiritual component, the cultural component, the intellectual component, so many components. And I think religion has an important role to play, but just a segment. That's the reason I want to conclude with a partnership. We need to bring all these partners to the table. Faith leaders, scientific communities, indigenous communities, women, children, and only then the paradigm will change. So just want to stress that. Thank you.
And I'm sure, Scott, you have something to follow up on that because...
Okay, good. To the first part of your original question, Fabio, and others have addressed it well. is there a lingering resistance to engaging religions by so-called secular professional development actors? To the extent that there remains that hesitation, one might speak of an epistemological path dependency. That'll be on the quiz. Epistemological path dependency. Here's what I mean by this. I'm a dean of a new global affairs school, and there's a small group of deans that runs the place. And then we make our plans, and we kind of think alike, and we see the world and the university alike. And then we have to deal with this necessary annoyance called a faculty. And they come in, and they have their ideas, and they don't seem to be as well informed as we are. I have at least one of my colleagues here who has to suffer this in the room, and don't stand up, please, Mahan. And you know, it's a little unsettling, because we do know better than the faculty, or so we think, and we have insights and expertise they don't have. In the same way, those who have been working in professional development organizations for years and were trained this way, it's quite a risk to welcome, especially the religious, at least in the minds of people who have this way of knowing path dependency. This is how we know the world. And you're welcoming into this conversation, even if you select as carefully as possible to avoid it, you're welcoming in real potential troublemakers. Yes, they share ideas about poverty and human flourishing and therefore the good, but precisely because they're taking account of the invisible or the non-materialistic or economic dimensions of what development means, and because they're coming, to the extent that you're inclusive, from so many different traditions that don't agree with one another and don't always internally agree with one another, this is a potential recipe for chaos, or certainly for loss of control. My mentor, Martin Marty, wrote a wonderful book called When Faiths Collide, and he talked in that book about the risk of hospitality. And if you're really going to be hospitable to one another and welcome the other into a dialogue that's consistent and plays by the rules of honesty, transparency, freedom of thought, and real freedom of religion, that is, you put religious ideas on the table as equal partners in the dialogue, then there are two things that you're risking. One is hostility at some level, whether it's open or under the table. That is, when you begin to talk about your points of view, they can be quite incommensurate. They don't seem to go together. In fact, you might object to, perhaps not what your partner across the table says, but I know of that sheikh or that priest or that imam who is part of your tradition who's a real troublemaker, etc. So there can be hostility, and you can exacerbate differences. But what Marty and others, and I think all of us, hope for and think is possible, is that there's also a risk in hospitality of transformation. And that is a different way, a different paradigm, a different way of seeing the relationship in the world between believers and somewhat believers and non-believers. There's a real shade, a real degree. And the transformation is that you take the risk of changing your mind, of breaking that epistemological path dependency. That if you're really listening to the other, and that's a credible witness, and that person is representing in a truthful way her or his constituencies in the field, the people they know, and you listen carefully and you kind of lower the barriers of your presuppositions. We even try that at times with the faculty. I'm very proud when I do that for a moment or two. But when you do that, when you lower the barriers, what you're risking is that you'll change. And that's a risk on both sides. And that risk of transformation is what this is about, I think. What dialogue and further engagement. Sharon's absolutely right. Follow the money. In this sense, you said more than that, but follow the money is one token. When Kim, who was the director of the World Bank, subsequently had some years ago a meeting at the World Bank, sponsored by the World Bank, on engaging religious actors. I don't know how many years ago it was, 5, 6 years ago. I don't know if Catherine Marshall is here at this meeting. She'll be here tomorrow. But I went up to Catherine, who's been a champion of having the World Bank in particular engage religious actors. I embraced her and said, well, this is the moment of triumph. Here we are in the maw of the secular establishment, And we're celebrating Ramadan. The end of today, it was Ramadan, the feast today in the World Bank. And Catherine, being Catherine, said, "We'll see what the budget looks like." Now that's a real. So the money's important because even though it's gotten better, these organizations that work, faith-based organizations, the more resources they have, the more good work they can do. And it's gotten better, but it's nowhere near what it needs to be. So let's all leave the room chanting, "No more epistemological path dependency."
Thank you, Scott.
Skills first. Teach the learning skills.
Thank you, because I really want to have at least 10, 15 minutes of interaction with our audience. I just want to ask you one word, because another things our world is troubled nowadays, and we know on which many levels. But many felt that there was seeds of hope for unity that emerged from some new initiatives of interreligious dialogue and collaboration, like the Declaration on Human Fraternity that was signed and was mentioned by Pope Francis and Sheikh Al-Tayeb. I want to ask you, do you think that this is something important and that is going to be crucial as well to reach some of these goals that the SDG? Is there a link also with this new era, hopefully, of interreligious dialogue and collaboration? Just 1 minute. Anyone wants to say, go with that?
In a word, yes, it's very important. But here I think we really do need to look at the religions and with a more critical eye. I think that interreligious dialogue is a way of walking the talk when we talk about partnership. But in actual fact, we do see many religions still quite exclusive in their approach, caring for their own communities and not for the world at large. And that, I think, needs to change.
Okay, very good.
Just a simple point. I remember that meeting in Abu Dhabi, and what still remains in my mind is an image. After Pope Francis reached the airport, there was the Grand Imam, and they got into the same car. And that's the image that remained with me. I think that's probably what's important today. That we can be we are under the same roof, but we don't need to polarize, we don't need to be exclusive. And that's also in the human fraternity document led to Fratelli Tutti. And that's where I see hope, that we can have what we call the dialogue of hands, not just ideas. We can work together, stay together, really be sisters and brothers, as we are feeling today.
The instinct around these dialogues and these declarations that have been signed, I think, is just right when it's framed around human fraternity and inclusive citizenship. What does citizenship have to do with all of this? This is all about inclusivity and having more voices involved. The concept of inclusive citizenship is radical in a way. One would think in societies which aspire to be democratic, and certainly those that don't, that this concept is already worn over, so to speak. But to infuse the notion of inclusive citizenship with a kind of sacral, a kind of holy patina, is really remarkable. To say it is your duty religiously as well as civically to be a citizen of your society, to vote, to participate, whatever it may be, actively, to advance human fraternity. Wow, that's in a way could be heard as a very radical proposition, but it's the foundation in a way of those SDGs. If they're going to be inclusive, if they're going to reach and address the needs of people, those needs have to be articulated by citizens, and citizenry has to be inclusive.
Thank you. It's very
For me, I think part of the problem with this conversation is we sometimes conflate politics with religion. Many of the problems that we have more to do with politics, more to do with the economy and development than with faith per se. Okay, so, and we've created a world, unfortunately, where we've conflated these and they're used in a cynical manner by politicians. So when you have a war between the West and Afghanistan, America and Afghanistan, or between America and Iraq, and America and Syria, and America and Libya, is that a war between Christians and Muslims? Is that is that something that we on this table can fix? It's about politicians basically fighting over resources, politicians fighting over power. Okay, now I think one way we have to continue doing this is to continue to ensure that people understand that anyone who appropriates the language or the imagery of religion to act in a manner that is inconsistent with the teachings of that religion is an outcast. Okay, you can't go and bomb people and kill people in the name of Islam or in the name of radical Christianity when you know that the faith itself does not allow this killing of innocents. So to that extent, coming together to agree on these values and ensure that whoever is involved of whatever faith, and that means we condemn it when Israel kills Palestinians. We condemn it when Muslim fundamentalists go and bomb churches. We condemn it when right-wing extremist Christian groups are students. So it's just got to be agreeing on this core set of values, applying them consistently, okay? Not that when America bombs innocent citizens, it's fine, but when an Arab does it, it's wrong. Not that Israel can kill 100 Palestinians, but Palestinians cannot kill one Israeli. So we've got to have that agreement. I think the great advantage of this conversation is that we look deep into the resources of Christianity, of Islam, of Judaism, and we see that none of these religions condones the kind of violence that we see, and then to apply the same standards to whoever is guilty of violating these standards. It doesn't matter if it's the United States of America or Saudi Arabia or Iran or Israel. The same standards have to apply.
And then we'll go to the audience.
I really need to try not to be very short because it's one of my most favorite topics. The first point is I very welcome such declarations. But of course, it's not enough. Where were the other religious leaders of the other religions? I was missing them. We need a declaration where all the religious leaders and communities are part of it. And this is what we need to work for. And that links to what you have been saying, Emir, is that we have to think very differently how to include young people into the dialogue. I have been talking to a lot of people in the last weeks, including Dr. Iyad Abou-Mogli from the Faith for Earth Initiative, UNEP. And I was asking him, tell me, Iyad, how is it going in your own Muslim communities with regards to young people interested in the SDGs? He said, there's not much interest. They are not interested. I go in my own Sikh community. They are not interested. I don't know how it is in Christianity, but I have the sense that somehow there's a gap between the urgency and the capability of religious communities and leaders to inspire the young generation for all the things that you have been saying. And of course, we need to go into the education system and think, how can we teach values and strengthen the ethical side in our young people? Because at the moment, at least, I have the feeling that we are training them, also in the university, sorry, forgive me, to become very good biological machines who function very well on a capitalistic market. But where are the values that they can internalize to ensure that they live a good life in dignity, but also where the dignity of the environment and minorities is respected? My last point, Emir, referring to the very delicate relationship between politics and religion. I'm not now speaking from the perspective of part, because here we are working at a different level where, of course, we bring religious actors together with religions. But from an interreligious perspective, and I was the president of the largest interfaith council in Germany, and I was doing this on a voluntary basis, We were successful because we worked very closely with state actors, with the local state actors, with the politicians. There are different levels of interreligious dialogue. We can come together and have nice festivals. It's nice. It doesn't change anything. But when we came together, 9 religions, and developed a guideline for soul care, where for the first time non-Christian actors were included, Muslims were included, and the hospitals had a guideline. What do I do when I have a Muslim, a Baha'i, a Buddhist patient here in terms of soul care? What do I need to do? They didn't know what to do. So we developed a guideline, and when I was the president, I used to say, bring me 9 political parties which are able to develop one common document. They will fail, but we were able to develop a document despite all the challenges we have in interreligious dialogue. So what we need is concrete outcomes, is concrete collaboration together with state actors, but also with other civil society actors, which are even atheists. Of course, we need to include them.
Thank you very much, Kushwant. We have 10 minutes. I'd like to see if there is any questions, comments, or you want to raise. Please keep it short so that I can draw a few people in the conversation. And I'm sure someone will bring you a microphone. Okay. Can I use the mic? She has the microphone. Okay.
Hello. Thank you for the panel. I heard a few of you talk about the risk of transformation in these conversations of interfaith discussions, and I was wondering if you had an idea about how easy it is to convince the people you're speaking with to accept that risk of transformation, and how successful it can be in your experience.
Okay. Thank you. I'll collect a few questions. There is a father here. Can you, Father, there is the microphone there.
A question as such, but a suggestion.
That's okay.
Because Father George suggested me. We, particularly with the young people, but for everyone, is valued. When we speak about ethics, moral, religions, they say, oh no, too many restrictions, let us forget. What is completely wrong, what our religion is teaching, Christianity, Muslim also the same, is mostly positive. We know, love. Do to the other what you would like the other should do toward you. No, it's not don't do what, but do what you want. This is you could say, what is moving our commitment, as well as for environment. Already in the 16th century, they asked, who is the owner of the ocean? The Spanish or the Portuguese? And the theologian answered, no one of the states. Spanish against their own king. Why? We are speaking about human rights. You know, the first draft of United Nations didn't have any mention of human rights. And therefore, the Christian, at that time were Protestant and Catholic, and the Jewish community at the beginning of 45, they make 3 different parallel issues asking to President Roosevelt, to include human rights in the Charter of the United Nations. Otherwise, we did not have. So that's just to say the rule of the other aspect of the history. But what is most important for me is that we have to be committed for the well-being, global well-being, and we don't belong to the kingdom of heaven unless we are working for the kingdom of God on earth, justice and peace. Thank you.
Thank you, Father. One final question, and then I'll give you final word to the panel. Is there anyone else who wants to ask, make a point? No, well, in that case, I think we have a few minutes, 1 minute each, to say a final reflection or word. Yes, please.
Just Momin, the young man who asked the first question might need the mic. Momin, we want to understand that your question, that we got the question right about the risk of transformation. Were you saying what does it take to get people to take that risk? And were you referring to us in particular? I didn't get the final point of the question. Is that right?
Yeah. I was wondering if you had any specific experience or...
Let her give you the mic, I think.
Yeah, I was wondering if you had any idea on what it takes to invite that sort of radical idea of accepting that you might change in yourself, and if you had any idea of what that looks like in a successful outcome.
What the successful outcome would look like?
Yeah.
It might be, I'll start, and this will be my 1 minute. Is that what you want?
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, here's my 1 minute. It will be disruptive if it works, at least initially disruptive, I think. And I think a lot, frankly, depends upon who's convening and moderating such a discussion, setting ground rules, but building trust before you get to the point of engaging really potentially controversial issues. I think there's a longer process of trust building among people. And that kind of fellowship is built through meetings, through sharing meals, through getting to know one another personally. That's not always possible, but that's the platform by which there's a certain amount of trust. I can trust that you'll listen to me respectfully. I will listen to you respectfully. So there's a lot of preliminary work that has to be done. And those conversations, I think, can become, when I say disruptive, I don't mean that's necessarily a negative thing. If they're successful, there's a real frank exchange and a real questioning of the different assumptions people bring to the table. So it's a process. I recommend that book to you that I mentioned from Marty, When Faiths Collide, but there are other really fine treatises and books about how to get these kind of conversations started.
Well, for my 1 minute, I'll say one of the biggest problems, obviously, with any conversation around religion and development is the question of definition. Okay, so I have, for example, today said something about Islam, but you know, that might be my view of Islam that is not shared by the next Muslim, and so a lot of the engagement, as going back to the last question, you probably find that you have a greater challenge dealing with those who belong to your own faith, trying to agree on what is, in fact, the teaching of your faith and even than with others. But also, I'd like to say that a lot of good work has been happening. I first met the Archbishop of Canterbury many, many years ago when he was still Canon Justin Welby. And he was then in charge of the Anglican Church's Coventry Cathedral, which was a center for interreligious dialogue. And I was amazed by the amount of work the Coventry Cathedral did to bring peace between Muslims and Christians in northern Nigeria, not the kind of place that, and this was before Boko Haram and all that, conflicts within Kaduna. So the reality is that religious actors have been working, and I think if we underestimate the amount of work that's required to ensure that you have the peace that you need for development, and for that reason alone, we need to increase the level of engagement between the nation state and the religious actors and international development agencies and religious actors.
I very much agree what you say. I'm not sure if I got the question completely right, but I'm trying to refer to it. I think there's a strong connection, and I've said it before, between transformation and courage. And also I think it's strongly linked to coherence. So imagine today, like I speak to you about environmental protection, and then you see me driving a very big car, although I'm sitting alone in that car. Would you think that I'm a person which in any way inspires you after having talked to you very nicely? I think even if I inspired you by my speaking, after you see me driving away with that big car, the inspiration is gone. So I think especially in the field of religion, it's very, very important that we have role models who are authentic and who don't preach different things and do different things. It's very, very easy to preach, as we all know, but it's very, very difficult to change. And you know that little comic where the person says, who wants change? And everyone raises their hand, and then the next question is, and who wants to change? And then no one is raising their hand. So I know it's very difficult even to change little things in your own life, and it's very difficult to change things in interreligious dialogue. It's very difficult to change things in politics. But the first thing we can all do is to start with ourselves. So transformation is very much linked with being disruptive to ourselves.
In the half second I have left, I just want to say that I've got enormous faith in young people today. We can see on the streets, those are the ones who are demonstrating for change, for climate change, for justice in many ways. And recent research that I saw is that 75% of young people hold the values, religious values. They might not have trust in the institutions of religion, but they are actually holding those values. And another piece of research is that, don't quote me on this, but it's something like in 2050, over 50% of this world is going to be under the age of 18. So we absolutely have to include them in this work.
Thank you. I will take off from where Sharon stopped of the young people. I think one question that has not really come into our discussion is the urgency of the climate crisis. And I think we are still talking SDGs very comfortably. You know, the other day we had a visit from a psychologist from the US who said the teenagers and children are going through what they call the climate stress anxiety. It's become a big problem. So if the youth are not really interested, it's probably because we are not responding to their concerns. I think that's a challenge to us faith communities. Allow me, if I have 30 seconds, to end on a note of hope. You know, a few years ago, and we are working very much on it, we hope to work with other churches, religions. A Harvard study in 2009 said, any change in history has always been bottom-up. And every change was possible when we had the critical mass. And the critical mass is not a big number. If you have 3.5% of a group, we have the critical mass for change. So that's how the Berlin Wall came down, what Mahatma Gandhi did, Martin Luther King did, Nelson Mandela did. I think in this moment of planetary emergency, if religions can come together and create the critical mass, we would have made our contribution. Thank you.
Well, I want to thank you, all the speakers of this roundtable. And I think, this conversation has done what it was supposed to do, just contribute to a little bit stretch the political imagination of what is possible to do to achieve some of these DSGC, and perhaps think of some new creative, innovative solution that can help us all together to achieve that. And with this, I want to thank you for having listened, and we look forward to continuing this conversation in the days to come. Thank you very much.